For a long time, the human body was shaped by cold, hunger, walking, waiting, and surviving inside a world of ice. Then the ice began to retreat. Forests moved, animals changed, rivers shifted. The old pressures did not vanish in one moment, but the world around the body slowly became different. And when the world changes, the body does not simply remain the same. It carries old traces into a new age, like a memory written in bone, fat, muscle, and sleep. So what really happened to us after the cold world ended? Why the human body changed when the Ice Age ended? The end of the Ice Age was not a door closing behind humanity. It was more like a long, dim room slowly filling with another kind of light. For many generations, people still lived with cold wind, uncertain animals, hard seasons, and landscapes shaped by ice, even while the world around them began to soften. Glaciers withdrew from some places, sea levels slowly rose, forests spread into lands that had once been open and cold, and familiar paths across plains, rivers, and coasts began to change. No single human body woke one morning and found itself in a new age. The change was slower than a lifetime in many places, and uneven across the earth. Some groups still faced deep cold. Others began to live among woodlands, valleys, richer coasts, or warmer grasslands. This matters because the human body does not change, because a date changes on a chart. It changes because daily life changes. It changes when feet walk different distances, hands gather different foods, children grow under different pressures, hunger arrives in another season, and cold no longer demands the same answer every night. The body that entered the warming world was already the result of a much older journey. Long before the last great cold reached its height, human ancestors had carried upright walking, skilled hands, social learning, fire use, tool-making, and long childhoods into many environments. The Ice Age did not create humanity from nothing. It tested an already flexible creature. That flexibility was one reason humans could live near ice, in dry steppe, beside rivers, along coasts, and in places where survival depended less on one strength than on adjustments repeated across generations. When the climate began to shift after the coldest phases, the pressure on the body did not disappear. It changed shape. A colder, more open world had favored endurance, planning, cooperation, heat from fire, clothing from animal skins, and the ability to turn scattered resources into survival. A warmer world did not remove difficulty. It rearranged difficulty. Forests can hide animals as much as they shelter people. Wetlands can feed a group, but they can also slow travel and bring dampness and unfamiliar risks. Rising seas can make coasts richer for fishing and shellfish, but they can also cover old camps and paths beneath water. So when we ask why the human body changed when the Ice Age ended, the first answer must be patient. The body changed because the world that shaped daily effort changed first. It changed because the old balance between cold, food, movement, danger, rest, and reproduction began to tilt. Archaeology gives us hints of this slow turning, not a perfect movie of ancient lives. Stone tools, hearths, bones, shelters, burials, and the remains of plants and animals suggest that people kept adjusting their ways of living as environments shifted. But those traces do not allow us to speak with false certainty about what every group felt, wanted, or understood. Human life after the ice was not one story. It was many regional stories, unfolding at different speeds under different skies. In some places, people followed herds across changing open land. In others, they used fish, birds, seeds, nuts, roots, and smaller animals. In some regions, groups became more settled for part of the year, while elsewhere movement remained essential. Each change touched the body quietly. Bones record stress and labor. Teeth can hold signs of diet. Growth can reflect childhood conditions. Ancient meals can show that the human body was meeting a changing menu. Yet none of these signs should be turned into a simple claim that humans instantly became weaker, softer, or modern. The deeper truth is calmer and more important. The end of the Ice Age began a long negotiation between an old body and a new world. That negotiation did not erase the past. It carried the past forward, inside muscles, hunger signals, sleep patterns, fat storage, temperature sensitivity, and the human need to adapt wherever the ground beneath life changes. If a warming climate changed the human body, it did so through ordinary days before it did so through deep biology. The body does not listen to weather in the way a tree line listens to warmth, moving slowly across a valley or climbing a hillside over many generations. The body listens through work. It listens through what a child eats while growing, how far an adult must walk, how often a group faces cold nights, how much weight hands carry, how long hunger lasts, and which people survive long enough to raise children. After the coldest phases of the last ice age, many landscapes became more varied. Open plains in some regions gave way to woodland, wetlands, lakes, new coastlines, and river systems. Animals did not all respond in the same way. Some large species declined or disappeared in certain regions, while other animals, fish, birds, shellfish, plants, and seasonal foods became more important to many groups. None of this means that one old way of life ended everywhere. Human beings had already spread into many environments because our ancestors were not locked into a single survival method. From the beginning of our deeper story, the human body had been shaped by a rare combination: walking on two legs, hands able to make and carry tools, a brain built for learning from others, and a long childhood that allowed knowledge to pass across generations. When the Ice Age world began to loosen, these older traits did not vanish. They were redirected. A spear, a fire, a basket, a digging stick, a shelter frame, or a path remembered by elders could change what the body had to endure. Culture acted like a second skin around biology. That second skin did not make the body separate from nature. It changed the kind of pressure nature placed upon it. In a colder open world, survival could depend on moving widely, reading animal movement, protecting the body from freezing, and storing knowledge about scarce resources. In a warmer and more mixed world, survival might depend more on finding many smaller foods, returning to reliable water, managing seasonal abundance, and staying longer in places where resources came back again and again. The muscles, joints, teeth, bones, and digestive system did not transform overnight. But when children grew up under slightly different burdens, and then their children grew up under those burdens again, the human body's relationship with the world slowly changed. Archaeological traces support this cautious picture. In many regions after the last ice age, there is evidence for broader diets, greater use of aquatic foods in some places, more intensive plant gathering in others, and changing tool traditions. These clues are not simple enough to turn into one clean story. A stone blade cannot tell us every movement of the hand that used it. A fishbone cannot tell us how often a family slept hungry. A worn tooth cannot speak for all people in all lands. But together, such traces suggest that humans were living through a shift in daily pressure. The body was still ancient, still carrying the legacy of cold endurance, long movement, hunger, and cooperation. Yet the world was beginning to ask new things from that body. Some groups may have needed less extreme cold resistance because shelters, clothing, fire, and warmer climates reduced exposure. Some may have walked differently because food could be gathered from smaller territories during certain seasons. Some may have used their hands more in repeated tasks connected to processing plants, fish, hides, wood, fibers, or stored foods. These are not signs of a sudden loss of humanity's old strength. They are signs of a changing bargain between body and environment. The question becomes deeper when we remember that human evolution had never been only about bones and muscles. It had always been about bodies living inside groups. A lone body has limits. A group can remember water, share food, guard children, keep fire, teach skills, and notice patterns in weather and animals. When the Ice Age ended, it was not only climate that shifted. The social world around the body could shift too. Longer stays in favourable places, richer seasonal camps, and more repeated contact with certain landscapes may have changed how children learned survival. The body that once had to follow a wide, cold world could begin, in some places, to live around places that returned, season after season. That quieter change matters. It means the human body changed not because the ice ended as an event, but because the end of the ice rearranged the daily conditions that had shaped human life since its beginning. The traces left by the Ice Age were not only outside the body, in valleys carved by ice, in drowned coastlines, or in the bones of animals no longer living in many regions. Some of those traces remained inside human life itself. A body that had come through cold generations did not become a different body simply because forests spread, rivers shifted, or warmer seasons returned. It carried habits of survival that were older than any single climate. It carried the need to store energy when food was uncertain, the ability to keep moving when comfort was absent, the sensitivity to darkness, cold, hunger, and group safety, and the deep dependence on learned behavior. These were not perfect ancient powers. They were compromises shaped across a long human journey. From the beginning of humanity's deeper story, the body had never lived alone as a bare animal body facing the world without tools or memory. It lived with fire, stone, wood, skin, speech, imitation, care, and the shared attention of others. That is why the end of the Ice Age is so important. It did not simply remove cold from the story. It changed the relationship between the old body and the surrounding world. A person born after the coldest landscapes had begun to retreat might still inherit a body shaped by earlier pressures, but that body could now grow inside a different pattern of food, movement, shelter, and social life. The change was quiet enough that no one living through it needed to know that a great age was ending. A child learned where food could be found. An adult watched the movement of animals and seasons. A group returned to places that had been useful before. A fire was kept, a tool was repaired, a shelter was built, a meal was shared, and the body adapted through repetition before it adapted through anatomy. This is one reason we must be careful with the word changed. Some changes were biological over long spans of time. Others were changes in how an old body was used. A hand that once gripped a spear might also grind, scrape, weave, dig, carry, cut, or sort. Legs that once followed wide herds across open country might still travel far, but in some regions they could also return often to water, woods, fish, nuts, roots, or seasonal camps. Teeth and bones might slowly show different stresses, not because human beings had stopped being ancient, but because ancient human life itself was entering new arrangements. The evidence we have is incomplete, and that incompleteness should make the story calmer, not weaker. Archaeological remains do not give us a single voice from the past. They give us patterns, changing tools, different animal bones, traces of fires, remains of plants, signs of repeated occupation, and the silent record held in skeletons where preservation allows it. These patterns suggest that the end of the Ice Age opened a long period of adjustment. In some places, people continued older mobile ways of life. In others, they used richer local resources more intensely. In some regions, rising seas erased old living places that may once have held important parts of the story. This means that the body's history after the Ice Age is partly visible and partly hidden. What we can say with care is that the human body was no longer being tested by the same exact mix of cold, open land, large animal movement, and severe seasonal uncertainty in every place. New pressures began to matter: dampness, crowding in favourable places, repeated labour, changing diets, and closer contact with stored food, animals, waste, and other people would later become important in different ways. Those later developments did not happen everywhere at once, and they should not be forced into one simple line. Still, the direction of the question becomes clear. When the Ice Age ended, the body entered a world where survival depended less on one harsh environmental rhythm and more on many smaller rhythms overlapping. The old cold world had asked the body to endure scarcity, distance, exposure, and sudden risk. The warmer world still asked for endurance, but it also asked for flexibility around new foods, new landscapes, new settlements, and new relationships between people and place. So the first great change was not that humans became modern. It was that an ancient body began to live inside a world that no longer matched all of the pressures that had helped shape it. That mismatch did not appear as a dramatic break. It began as a slow tension, a quiet carrying forward of Ice Age memory into a softer, stranger, and still difficult Earth. A body that lived through the cold world was not merely a body that felt cold air on the skin. It was a body placed inside a whole arrangement of cold. The ground could be hard. The wind could take heat away faster than still air. Food could be distant, buried, migrating, or available only after effort. Darkness could arrive with danger and a falling temperature. Even when humans had fire, clothing, shelters, tools, and group care, the body still had to help carry the burden. It had to keep blood warm enough to protect the organs. It had to move through cold without wasting every bit of energy. It had to sleep near warmth when possible, wake when needed, and continue the next day even when the body was not fully rested. This does not mean that Ice Age people were a separate kind of superhuman. It means their daily world gave the body regular tests that many later environments would not repeat in the same way. Cold is not only a feeling, it changes the price of living. A body exposed to cold must spend energy to stay alive. Muscles may shiver. Blood flow may shift away from the skin. Hands can become clumsy when they lose warmth. Feet can suffer when wet, frozen, or poorly protected. Hunger becomes more serious when the body is also trying to defend its temperature. These are basic biological pressures, and they were never faced by biology alone. From the deep beginning of the human story, our ancestors survived by joining bodily ability with learned skill. Upright walking carried the body across open land. Hands shaped tools and held fuel. Minds remembered paths, seasons, and materials. Groups allowed warmth, warning, care, and teaching to be shared. The Ice Age did not ask only whether a human body could stand cold. It asked whether a human group could build enough protection around that body to keep life going. When the cold world began to retreat, this old system did not collapse. Fire still mattered. Clothing still mattered. Shelter still mattered. But in many places, the balance slowly shifted. A warmer season could last longer. Trees could change the movement of wind. Snow cover could shrink or appear for shorter periods. Rivers and lakes could open new routes and foods. The body was still ancient, but the air around it was beginning to ask a different question. Instead of facing cold as a constant upper pressure on survival, some communities may have faced a more mixed world, where cold remained in certain seasons and regions, but no longer ruled every decision with the same force. This is where the idea of bodily change should remain careful. The human body did not suddenly forget how to handle cold. No generation simply lost an Ice Age body. But when a pressure becomes less constant, the way a body is used begins to change. A child growing in a milder setting may spend fewer nights at the edge of severe exposure. An adult may still work hard, but that work may involve woodlands, wetlands, shorelines, and smaller foods rather than the same wide, cold plains. A group may still need endurance, but less of that endurance may be spent against freezing wind and more against travel through brush, mud, water, or changing seasonal camps. These differences seem ordinary, yet they are exactly the kind of ordinary differences that shape bodies over time. Bones respond to repeated strain. Muscles respond to the work demanded of them. Fat storage, hunger, heat, rest, and effort are all tied to the environment in which people live. The origin of this story reaches far behind the final melting of the ice. Humans were already a tropical African lineage that had moved, adapted, learned, and survived far beyond the warmer places where earlier ancestors began. Living in cold regions required cultural protection as much as natural tolerance. That is why the end of the Ice Age did not simply free the body from cold. It revealed how much of human survival had always depended on the space between flesh and world, the cloak, the fire, the shelter, the meal, the path, the group. As the world warmed, that space changed. The body could rely on different protections, different foods, different daily movements, and different risks. The cold had once made survival expensive in a very direct way. After the ice retreated, the cost of survival did not vanish. It moved into new forms, and the human body began to carry its old cold inheritance into a climate that was no longer built around the same ancient demand. When cold becomes less severe in many places, the body does not simply become free. It receives a different set of demands. In the older cold world, keeping warmth was part of almost every movement. The body burned energy while walking, but it also spent energy defending itself from the air. It needed food not only for strength, but for temperature. It needed fat, not only as stored fuel, but as a margin against uncertain days. It needed sleep near protection, because a sleeping body cannot search for heat once the night has turned dangerous. These are simple facts of mammal life, but for humans they were always wrapped inside culture. Our ancestors did not survive cold by fur alone, or by muscle alone, or by some perfect ancient toughness. They survived because bodies and learned behavior worked together. Fire reduced the cold, clothing held warmth close to the skin, shelters slowed wind, and groups made it possible for children, the injured, and the tired to stay alive in ways a single body could not manage alone. After the Ice Age, as many environments became warmer or more mixed, this relationship began to shift. The human body still had the same basic needs. It still needed warmth, calories, rest, and protection. But in some regions, the pressure to fight cold every day became less central than before. A milder climate could mean less energy spent on keeping the body warm during certain seasons. It could mean more time when hands were not made stiff by freezing air. It could mean children growing in conditions where severe cold was still possible but less constant. Yet this did not make life easy. A warmer world could also bring damp ground, insects, rotting food, difficult forests, new patterns of disease, and food sources that required different skills. The body was not moving from hardship into comfort. It was moving from one kind of hardship into another. This is why the end of the Ice Age is such an important turning point for the history of the human body. The body that had entered cold lands long before was descended from older populations whose deeper origins lay in warmer climates. Human beings had reached cold places not because the body alone was naturally built for ice, but because human adaptation could extend beyond the skin. Tools, fire, clothing, shelter, cooperation, and memory allowed a relatively vulnerable body to live where an unprotected body would have struggled. When the world warmed, some of those protections remained, but their role changed. A cloak that once stood between life and freezing might become a seasonal tool. A shelter that once blocked killing wind might become a place for storing food, sleeping near others, or returning through the year. A fire that once guarded the body from cold could also cook plants, smoke meat, shape wood, protect a camp, or gather people into a shared night. As cold lost some of its force in many places, the human body had to spend more of its life inside other pressures. Food could become more varied, but also more labor-intensive. Plant foods might need digging, soaking, grinding, roasting, or repeated gathering. Fish and shellfish might require knowledge of tides, rivers, baskets, nets, hooks, or traps. Smaller animals could demand patience rather than the wide pursuit of large herds. In these changing worlds, the body was still working hard, but the work was not the same. The cold had once shaped the rhythm of energy: eat enough to move enough to find food, stay warm enough to live through the night. After the ice retreated, energy could be pulled toward new tasks: processing, carrying, building, storing, returning, and caring for more stable places. This kind of change is easy to underestimate because it is not dramatic. It does not appear as a sudden new organ or a visible break between ancient and modern humans. It appears as a slow change in how much heat the body must defend, how often hunger meets cold at the same time, how children grow, and which physical skills are practiced every day. Over generations, repeated daily life becomes part of the body's story. Not always through genetic change, and not always in ways that can be measured clearly, but through bones, muscle use, growth, wear, and the habits a body learns from its world. The human body after the Ice Age was still old in its design, still carrying a deep past of movement, scarcity, and exposure. But as the cold became less absolute, some ancient demands became less frequent, while new ones moved closer. The body did not abandon the Ice Age. It began to live with its memory under a different sky. A body does not lose an old capacity in the same way a tool is dropped on the ground. More often, it loses the daily world that kept that capacity sharp. This is the quieter meaning of the body after the Ice Age. The people who lived as the cold retreated were still fully human in the old sense. They still needed endurance, heat, food, sleep, caution, cooperation, and memory. They still faced cold seasons, storms, hunger, injury, and dangerous landscapes. But in many regions, the exact pressure of the Ice Age world was no longer pressing on the body with the same regular force. A body that is often cold learns to organize life around warmth. A body that must travel far learns to accept distance as ordinary. A body that grows up with uncertain food learns the value of stored energy, patience, and shared meals. When the environment changes, those needs do not vanish, but their rhythm changes. The old abilities remain possible, yet they may be used less often, in different ways, or under different limits. This is not a story of humans suddenly becoming weak. It is a story of some ancient demands becoming less constant, while other demands moved forward. From the deeper beginning of the human line, survival had never depended on one perfect body. It depended on a body able to cooperate with tools, fire, memory, and other people. That is why cold resistance in humans was never simply a matter of skin and fat. It was also a matter of making clothing, choosing shelter, controlling fire, planning movement, and staying close enough to others for warning and care. In the cold world, those behaviors kept the body under regular discipline. People had to notice exposure before it became dangerous. They had to gather fuel before night. They had to protect children, who lose heat more easily than strong adults. They had to keep hands useful when cold could make fingers slow and painful. The body, the group, and the landscape were bound together by temperature. When the world warmed, that bond loosened in some places. It did not break. Cold still returned. Mountains, winters, storms, and northern lands still tested people, but the warmer world allowed more lives to be organized around other pressures. Food processing, plant gathering, fishing, storage, repeated camps, and later more settled ways of living could occupy more of the body's time. In such a world, a person might still be capable of walking far or enduring cold, but daily life might not call on those capacities with the same intensity. Archaeology cannot measure an ancient feeling of toughness, and it would be careless to pretend that it can. What it can show, in some places, are shifts in tools, diets, settlement patterns, animal remains, and skeletal stress. These traces suggest that after the Ice Age, many human groups were not simply repeating the same cold world life in a warmer setting. They were adjusting to environments that asked for new combinations of effort. Some of these combinations may have reduced certain old tests. Others may have introduced new burdens. A body that spends less time resisting severe cold may spend more time grinding hard seeds, carrying water, processing fibers, bending over tasks, or remaining near a camp where waste, smoke, crowding, and infection become more important. Later in human history, especially with farming in some regions, these changes would become stronger and more visible. But the roots of the change began earlier, in the long transition after the coldest world loosened its grip. The human body carried Ice Age memory into these new arrangements. It still stored energy in a world where food could fail. It still reacted strongly to cold because cold had been a real threat across deep time. It still depended on sleep, but sleep was shaped by fire, group safety, light, noise, and season. It still needed movement, but movement now followed different maps in different regions. This is the careful way to understand the loss. What was lost was not an ancient body as a single object. What faded, unevenly and slowly, was the constant training ground of the old cold world. When a pressure stops touching every generation in the same way, the body begins to live differently. Some capacities remain hidden, called out only in hardship. Some become weaker through disuse. Some are replaced by tools, shelters, habits, and social systems. And some remain inside us as discomforts we do not always understand. The pull toward warmth, the unease of cold darkness, the hunger for high energy, the need for movement, the strange tiredness of a body built by long hardship but living under newer demands. The end of the Ice Age did not erase the ancient human body. It changed the stage on which that body had to perform, and over time, a different stage began to create a different human life. Food was one of the first ways the warming world touched the human body. Climate can change slowly across hills, rivers, forests, and coastlines, but the body meets climate through the mouth, the stomach, the hands, and the distance between hunger and the next meal. During the colder phases of the Ice Age, many human groups lived in landscapes where large animals were important sources of meat, fat, hides, bone, and tools. This does not mean every group hunted the same animals, or that every meal came from a dramatic chase across open land. Human diets were always varied where varied foods were available, but in many cold and open environments, large herbivores could be central to survival, because one animal could provide a great deal of energy and material. After the Ice Age began to end, that older food world changed in many regions. Some large animals declined, some disappeared from certain landscapes, some shifted their ranges. Forests, wetlands, lakes, rivers and coastlines became more important in different places. The human body did not decide to change first. The menu of the earth began to change around it. A body shaped by older patterns of hunger now had to meet a world where food could be smaller, more scattered, more seasonal, and more varied. This shift reaches back to the deepest beginning of human life, because our ancestors had never been narrow eaters. The human line survived partly because it could use many foods, learn many methods, and pass those methods to children, walking hands-free, carrying tools, sharing knowledge, cooking with fire, cutting meat, cracking bones, digging roots, gathering plants, and watching animals were all part of the long human strategy. The end of the Ice Age did not invent flexibility. It made flexibility even more important. When the older cold world loosened, people could no longer depend everywhere on the same open landscapes, the same animal movements, or the same familiar balance between meat, fat, and seasonal plants. In some places, fish, shellfish, birds, nuts, seeds, roots, fruits, and smaller animals became more visible in the archaeological record. These foods were not inferior simply because they were smaller. Many could be rich, reliable, or important at certain times of year, but they often asked the body to work differently. Gathering shellfish requires returning to shores or waters at the right time. Fishing requires patience, tools, and knowledge of rivers, lakes, or tides. Seeds may require collecting, cleaning, grinding, roasting, or storing. Roots may require digging. Nuts may require cracking and processing. Small animals may require traps, nets, quick hands, or careful observation rather than long pursuit. The body was still working for food, but the work began to spread into different movements. Hands repeated finer tasks. Backs bent over preparation. Teeth met new textures. Stomachs received different mixtures of protein, fat, starch, fiber, and minerals. None of this should be turned into a simple claim that people suddenly ate worse or better. The evidence varies by region, and ancient diets were never one single diet. What matters is that food changed before the body fully changed. A child growing in a world of broader food choices, different seasonal shortages, and repeated processing tasks would develop under different pressures from a child growing in a more open, cold landscape where large animals carried more of the energy burden. Over generations, those daily pressures could leave traces in bones, teeth, growth, and wear. Archaeologists can sometimes see shifts in animal remains, plant residues, grinding stones, fishing tools, shell deposits, hearths, and settlement patterns. These clues do not tell us every meal, but they show that human bodies after the Ice Age were increasingly meeting a more mixed food world in many regions. The old body still remembered scarcity. It still stored energy when possible. It still responded strongly to fat, warmth, and dense food because those things had mattered across deep time. Yet the earth was beginning to offer food in different forms. The question of bodily change begins here, not with a sudden new anatomy, but with a repeated ancient scene. A human hand reaching for food in a landscape that no longer gives exactly what the older world once gave. A changing food world does not only change what people taste. It changes how the body spends time before the meal ever reaches the mouth. In colder, open environments, when large animals were available and successfully hunted or scavenged, a single animal could provide meat, fat, hide, sinew, bone, and fuel for many tasks. That kind of food source demanded skill, cooperation, risk, and movement, but it could also concentrate a great amount of energy in one event. As the climate warmed and many landscapes became more mixed, food in many regions could become less concentrated and more spread across the land. A shore might offer shellfish, a river might offer fish, a woodland might offer nuts, berries, small animals, birds, roots, and seasonal plants. A wetland might be rich but not simple. A forest might provide shelter, but also make movement slower and visibility shorter. The human body entered this world through repeated effort. Fingers picked, cracked, scraped, cut, sorted, peeled, and tied. Teeth met grit, fiber, cooked starch, dried meat, and hard shells. Shoulders carried baskets, wood, water, children, hides, tools, and gathered foods. The stomach received meals that could vary more by season, place, and method. This was not a clean improvement or a clean decline. It was a change in the work needed to turn the earth into human energy. From the older beginning of human life, the body had always depended on this ability to transform food before eating it. Humans did not simply take food as it came. They cut it, cooked it, shared it, carried it, saved it, and taught children how to find it again. Fire had already changed the relationship between food and the body long before the Ice Age ended. Tools had already made tough foods easier to open. Cooperation had already allowed people to use resources that would have been difficult for a lone body to manage. After the ice retreated, these old human abilities became useful in new combinations. A smaller food can still be powerful if a group knows when it returns, how to collect it, how to process it, and how to make it safe or digestible. A seed is small, but many seeds can matter. A shellfish is small, but a shore can give again and again. A root may be hidden underground, but knowledge can bring it into the fire. A fish may be hard to catch by hand, but a trap, net, hook, or spear can change the bargain. The body changed because daily food became tied to different gestures. It was no longer only the distance walked after animals or the cold endured while searching for meat. In many places, it also became the patience of gathering, the repeated motion of preparation, the careful timing of seasonal return, and the storage of energy in forms that could last beyond one meal. Archaeological traces allow a cautious view of this shift. In some places after the last glacial period, researchers find evidence of wider resource use, including aquatic foods, plant processing, grinding stones, shell deposits, changed toolkits, and repeated use of favorable locations. These traces do not mean that all humans suddenly became settled, or that hunting stopped, or that everybody met the same diet. They show something slower and more regional. Food strategies widened where the environment allowed them to widen. Human bodies were not only eating different things, they were being trained by different routines around food. A person who often processes plant foods may use the hands, jaw, neck, back and shoulders differently from a person whose life depends more heavily on wide movement after large animals. A child who grows with more frequent small foods may face different hunger patterns from a child whose group relies more on uncertain but high-energy animal resources. These differences do not have to be dramatic to matter. Over long time, the body remembers repetition. It remembers through muscle, posture, tooth wear, growth, and the small stresses that accumulate in bone. Yet the deeper point is not that one diet made humans better and another made humans worse. The deeper point is that the end of the Ice Age widened the distance between the old body and the new food landscape. The human body still carried ancient signals shaped by scarcity. Dense food still mattered. Fat still mattered. Warm cooked food still mattered. Sharing still mattered, because hunger had always been a social problem as well as a bodily one. But the road to food became more varied. Sometimes it led across open ground. Sometimes it led into woodland shade. Sometimes it led to riverbanks, shell beds, marshes, seeds, roots, or stored supplies. Each road asked the body to work in another way. When the Ice Age ended, food did not simply become easier. It became a broader conversation between climate, memory, tools, and flesh, and the human body slowly learned to live inside that conversation. The changing food world after the Ice Age did not only alter what people ate, it altered the way the body spent its day before food became part of the body at all. A large animal, when successfully hunted or found, could offer meat, fat, hide, bone, and sinew in one concentrated source, though reaching it required risk, skill, tools, cooperation, and often long movement. Smaller foods could be safer in one sense, yet more demanding in another. A handful of seeds, a basket of shellfish, a cluster of roots, a fish trap, a patch of nuts, or a small animal caught near water might require many repeated actions. The body bent, sorted, cracked, carried, scraped, dug, roasted, pounded, watched, waited, and returned. Hunger was no longer only a matter of finding one large source of energy. In many regions, it became more tightly connected to knowing many small sources and using them at the right time. This was not new to humanity. because flexibility had always been one of the deep human strengths. Our ancestors were never shaped by one food alone. From early human origins onward, the body survived by joining appetite with memory, hands, fire, tools, and shared learning. But after the coldest world began to retreat, that old flexibility had to operate inside landscapes that were changing quickly in historical terms, even if slowly in individual lives. Forests could offer nuts, fruits, birds, small mammals and wood, but they could also make large animals harder to see. Wetlands could offer fish, reeds, eggs, shellfish, and seasonal plants, but they could also be heavy, damp, and difficult to cross. Coasts could be rich, but rising seas could cover old places where people had once lived. Rivers could feed a group, but they also demanded knowledge of floods, banks, seasons, and movement. The body changed because the path to food changed. Hands became more tied to processing. Teeth met different mixtures of hard, fibrous, gritty, cooked, dried, or softened foods. Stomachs received calories in new combinations. Feet may have travelled shorter distances in some rich environments and continued long travel in others. Backs and knees may have carried more repeated strain from gathering, preparing, and transporting resources. These shifts were not the same everywhere, and they should not be made into a single, simple claim about all ancient people. Some groups still relied heavily on hunting, some used coastal foods, some focused more on plants during certain seasons, some moved widely, some returned again and again to favoured places. The truthful pattern is not that one diet replaced another, but that the human body began meeting more varied food pressures as the old Ice Age environments changed. Archaeological evidence gives careful support for this idea. Animal bones can show which creatures were brought to a site. Shell mounds can point to repeated use of coastal or river foods. Grinding stones can suggest plant processing, though their exact use can vary. Burned seeds, plant residues, tools, hearths, and toothware can all add small pieces to the larger picture. None of these traces can tell us every meal or every feeling of hunger. They do not allow us to say that life became easy, or that people suddenly ate poorly, or that the body changed in one clean direction. What they suggest is more subtle. The body after the Ice Age was increasingly living in a world where survival depended on many foods, many tasks, and many forms of attention. This matters for the title's central question, because food is one of the strongest bridges between climate and biology. Climate changes the plants, animals, water, and seasons. Those changes alter the work needed to eat. That work alters growth, strength, fatigue, teeth, bones, childhood, and the daily use of energy. The end of the Ice Age did not rewrite the body in a single generation. It changed the ground under hunger. An ancient body that had once met cold, distance, and large animals now had to meet a more layered world of smaller choices, repeated labour, and seasonal knowledge. The body carried the memory of scarcity, but the shape of scarcity was changing. It was no longer only the empty plain, the frozen night, or the missing herd. It could also be the wrong season for seeds, the river without fish, the shell bed already used, the nuts not yet ready, the roots hidden under hard ground, or the stored food that did not last. In that slow shift, the human body began to live less as a body chasing one ancient answer, and more as a body surviving through many smaller answers. Walking is one of the oldest signatures of the human body, and the end of the Ice Age changed the ground beneath that signature. Long before the last great cold began to loosen, human ancestors had already become creatures of distance. Upright walking freed the hands, opened the path to carrying tools and food, and allowed groups to move across wide landscapes with children, fuel, skins, stone, and memory. The Ice Age did not invent human walking, but it gave walking a severe importance in many regions. In cold open worlds, food, shelter, water, stone, animals, and safety could be separated by long stretches of land. A body might need to follow seasonal movement, cross exposed ground, return to known places, or leave a place when it could no longer support life. Walking was not exercise in the modern sense. It was the slow engine of survival. Feet met frozen soil, wet ground, dust, stone, grass, snow, and river edges. Hips, knees, ankles, and spine carried the cost of living in motion. The body's endurance was not only in muscle, It was in the ability to keep going while hungry, cold, uncertain, and responsible for others. When the Ice Age ended, this ancient relationship between movement and survival did not disappear, but in many places it began to change. Forests spread into some former open lands. Wetlands and lakes became more common in some regions. Coastlines shifted as sea levels rose. Rivers changed course or became more important. Animals changed their ranges. Some familiar open routes became wooded, flooded, or lost beneath water. At the same time, some landscapes became richer in smaller, more local resources. A group might still move widely, but the reasons for movement could become different. Instead of following the same kind of cold open pattern, people in some environments could return again and again to reliable rivers, shores, nut groves, fishing places, seasonal plants, or sheltered camps. The world did not truly become small everywhere. It became smaller in certain human ways, because some places began to hold more of what a group needed within reach. This matters for the body because distance is not only geography. Distance is pressure on bone, muscle, breath, appetite, and time. A person who must walk far every few days grows into a different rhythm from a person who can stay longer near a rich water source or return often to the same camp. A child carried across long routes experiences the body of the group differently from a child growing near repeated seasonal places. Adults who travel behind herds, search for stone, gather fuel, or move camp across open country use the body in one pattern. Adults who spend more time processing foods, building shelters, repairing tools, carrying water, fishing, collecting plants, or guarding stored resources use the body in another. Neither pattern is easy. The older cold world could demand distance. The warmer mixed world could demand repetition. Both shape bodies, but they shape them through different kinds of strain. Archaeological evidence can suggest such shifts, though it cannot turn them into one universal story. Repeated occupation sites, shell deposits, fishing equipment, plant processing tools, hearths, and changing animal remains can show that some groups were returning more often to favorable places or using local resources more intensively. Stone tools can sometimes reveal movement across landscapes when the raw material came from far away. Skeletons, where preserved, may show patterns of physical stress, growth, injury, and wear. These clues do not tell us that every person walked less after the Ice Age, and they do not prove that people suddenly became sedentary. That would be too simple. Many hunter-gatherer groups remained highly mobile long after the ice retreated, and mobility continued to be one of the great human strengths. The careful point is that the meaning of walking began to shift in many regions. Walking no longer always meant crossing a cold open world in pursuit of distant survival. It could also mean moving within a known territory, returning to seasonal abundance, carrying food from shore to camp, visiting familiar water, gathering wood, or traveling between places that had become part of a repeated yearly map. The body changed because its ancient endurance was being asked to serve new landscapes. The feet still carried human origins forward. The legs still held the memory of a species that survived by moving. But after the Ice Age, movement increasingly became tied to smaller circles of return, richer local places, and tasks that kept the body working even when it was not crossing great distance. The world underfoot had changed, and slowly the human body began to walk through history in another way. When people stay longer in one place, the body does not stop working. It simply begins to work under a different kind of order. In a colder and more open world, movement could be forced outward by hunger, animals, stone, fuel, water, and the need to leave before a place became empty. After the Ice Age, in some regions, the warming land began to create places that could hold people for longer portions of the year. A river bend, a lakeshore, a coast, a wetland edge, a woodland rich in nuts, or a valley with seasonal plants could become more than a temporary stop. It could become a repeated place in memory. People might leave and return, leave again and return again, until the landscape itself became part of the body's rhythm. This did not mean the birth of settled life everywhere, and it did not mean that ancient people suddenly stopped traveling. Many groups remained mobile, and movement continued to be central to survival. But in some environments, the circle of movement could tighten. The body might no longer spend the same share of its energy crossing long exposed distances. Instead, it might spend more time carrying things between known places, gathering around the same water, repairing shelters, processing food, watching children, collecting wood, and returning to resources that came back with the season. This is an important shift because the human body was never shaped only by how far it could go. It was also shaped by the pattern of effort repeated across a lifetime. From deep human origins, upright walking gave our ancestors more than distance. It allowed carrying. It allowed tools and food to move with the group. It allowed children to be protected across difficult ground. It made the body part of a travelling social system. After the Ice Age, that old walking body entered landscapes where carrying could become just as important as chasing or searching. A person might carry fish from water to camp, shells from shore to fire, stones from one place to another, wood for repeated use, water for a more settled camp, or gathered plants that required later preparation. The legs still worked, the back still worked, the shoulders still worked, but the work was increasingly tied, in some places, to return rather than escape. This kind of change can leave quiet marks. Repeated carrying can burden the spine, hips, knees, and feet. Repeated bending can shape posture and strain. Repeated sitting, grinding, scraping, weaving, cutting, or sorting can change the daily use of hands and shoulders. A body that once met survival mostly through distance may begin meeting survival through repetition. That is not an easier life. It is a different physical sentence written slowly into muscle and bone. Archaeology can only show pieces of this transition. A site used again and again may suggest that people found enough value in a place to return. Hearths, tool debris, food remains, storage pits in later contexts, shell accumulations, and worked materials may point toward repeated activity. Human remains, when they survive and are studied carefully, can sometimes show patterns of workload, injury, diet, and growth. But these signs need caution. They do not prove one single path for all people after the Ice Age. They do not prove that movement disappeared. They suggest that the relationship between place and body became more varied. Some people still travelled long distances. Others may have moved within seasonal territories. Others may have returned to rich locations often enough that place began to shape their bodies differently from the older cold plains. The beginning of the human story was never a story of staying still. It was a story of bodies learning land through movement. After the Ice Age, that learning became more layered. A path could mean following animals, but it could also mean returning to fish runs, nut groves, shell beds, water sources, toolstone, or camps remembered by older people. The body changed because the map of effort changed. Distance was still there, but it was joined by repetition. Endurance was still needed, but it could be endurance in carrying, preparing, waiting, and coming back. Over generations, a child raised inside this kind of repeated landscape could learn survival not only as forward motion, but as a rhythm of return. That quiet rhythm is one of the ways the end of the Ice Age entered the human body. When the world under the feet changes, the body slowly becomes a record of that change. After the Ice Age, walking did not disappear from human life, and it would be wrong to imagine that people simply stopped moving and became still. Many communities remained mobile, and in many regions movement continued to decide whether a group could eat, find water, avoid danger, reach stone, follow animals, or meet seasonal plants. But the meaning of movement was no longer exactly the same everywhere. A colder open landscape had often made distance one of the main costs of survival. A warmer and more varied landscape could create places where resources returned often enough for people to come back again and again. This changed the body's relationship with space. The body still walked, but sometimes it walked within a more familiar circle. It still carried weight, but sometimes that weight came from repeated tasks around a camp rather than from long movement between far places. It still needed endurance, but endurance could mean staying with work, returning to a shore, bending over food preparation, gathering fuel, or carrying water, not only crossing an open horizon. This matters because the human body came from a much older story of motion. Upright walking was not a small detail in human origins. It shaped the skeleton, freed the hands, changed how energy was used, and allowed food, tools, and children to move with a group. Long before the end of the Ice Age, The human body had already become a body of paths. It survived by remembering where things were, by moving between them, and by teaching younger people how land could be read. When the ice retreated, the paths themselves began to change. Some old coastal lands were slowly drowned by rising seas. Some open grasslands became woodland. Some routes became blocked by water, mud, forest, or shifting animal ranges. Other places became more attractive because they held fish, shellfish, nuts, edible plants, birds, or reliable fresh water. A human footstep after the Ice Age could therefore mean something different from an older footstep on a cold plain. It could be part of return rather than pursuit. It could belong to a seasonal map rather than an endless search. Archaeological traces can only show this carefully, but they are useful. Places occupied repeatedly suggest that some landscapes became dependable enough to draw people back. Changes in tools and food remains can suggest that local resources were being used more intensively. Human skeletons, when preserved and studied with caution, can sometimes show patterns of workload, injury, mobility, and diet. These signs do not tell us every route, and they do not allow a simple claim that all people after the Ice Age walked less. But they do suggest that bodies were being trained by different landscapes in different ways. Some were still shaped by long movement. Some were shaped more by repeated carrying, processing, bending, and returning. Some lived between both worlds. This is why the change after the Ice Age should be understood as a shift in pressure, not a sudden loss of strength. A body that moves less in one direction may work more in another. It may lose some regular training in long-distance travel, while gaining repeated strain from tasks tied to place. It may walk shorter routes more often. It may carry heavier loads over familiar ground. It may spend more time in postures that leave their own marks. Over time, such daily repetition becomes part of the body's history. The old Ice Age body did not vanish. It entered a world where survival was no longer always written across vast cold distances. In many places, survival began to form around return, memory, local abundance, and the repeated labor of staying near what the land could give. The human body changed because the earth no longer asked every footstep to mean the same thing. Shelter is one of the quietest ways the human body changed after the Ice Age, because shelter does not look like biology at first. It looks like wood, hide, stone, earth, firelight, a cave mouth, a windbreak, a camp beneath trees, or a place returned to when the season turns. Yet every shelter is also a message to the body. It tells the skin how much cold must be endured. It tells the muscles how much tension must be held through the night. It tells sleeping children whether wind will cut across them, whether rain will soak the ground, whether smoke will drift close, whether the group can remain together without being fully exposed. In the colder world, shelter was often not comfort. It was a necessary layer between life and the environment. Humans did not have thick fur or natural armor against winter. They survived because the body was surrounded by learned protection. Fire, clothing, bedding materials, animal hides, branches, stones, caves, and temporary structures made a human body more than bare flesh in the open air. This is a deep feature of human origins. From very early in our story, the body did not adapt alone. It adapted with things outside itself. A hand could shape a tool, a group could keep fire, memory could lead people back to a safer place. Knowledge could turn a hide into warmth, a branch into a frame, a cave wall into shelter from wind. When the Ice Age began to end, shelter did not stop mattering, but its meaning slowly widened. In many regions, as climates became milder or more varied, people could face less constant pressure from extreme cold, while still needing protection from rain, damp ground, wind, insects, animals, smoke, and the ordinary vulnerability of sleep. A shelter that once served mainly as defense against cold could become part of a broader human space, a place to process food, repair tools, care for children, store materials, gather around fire, or return during certain seasons. The body changed because the wall between body and weather became more flexible. If cold nights became less severe in some places, the body might spend less energy shivering and more time recovering. If camps were used repeatedly, the body might spend more time in tasks linked to place. If people could sleep with more protection from wind or wet ground, the rhythm of rest could change. even if danger and discomfort remained. This does not mean ancient people suddenly lived safely or comfortably. A simple shelter can fail, smoke can irritate. Dampness can chill the body even in a warmer world. Crowded sleeping can protect warmth, but it can also bring noise, disturbance, and closer contact. Returning to the same place can save effort, but it can also concentrate waste, attract animals, or create new risks. Shelter changed the pressure on the body, not by removing hardship, but by changing where hardship entered. Archaeology gives hints of this long change through hearths, post holes, stone settings, floor traces, concentrations of tools, remains of food, and repeated occupation of certain places. In some regions, people used caves or rock shelters. In others, they likely made structures from materials that often do not survive well, such as wood, hide, reeds, grass, or bark. The absence of perfect remains does not mean shelters were absent. It means much of the human story was made from perishable things. This is important for honesty. We cannot describe every ancient home as if we had stood inside it. We can only follow the traces that remain and compare them with what is biologically and archaeologically reasonable. What those traces suggest is that after the Ice Age, many human bodies lived within increasingly varied protective spaces. The old cold world had forced protection to be urgent. The warming world allowed protection to become more complex. Shelter was no longer only about surviving the night. It could become part of how people used a place, how they organized food, how children stayed close, how tools were kept, and how memory attached to the land. The body inside such spaces was still ancient, still sensitive to cold, darkness, hunger, and danger. But it was no longer always meeting the sky directly. A roof, a wall, a windbreak, a fire circle, or a familiar camp could soften one pressure while strengthening another. This is why shelter belongs at the center of the question. When the Ice Age ended, the human body changed not only because the climate warmed, but because humans built more ways to stand between climate and flesh. A shelter changes the body before it changes the landscape. A windbreak does not alter the bones in one night, and a roof of hide, reed, bark, or branches does not create a new human form by itself. But shelter changes what the body must endure repeatedly. It changes how cold reaches the skin, how wet ground touches sleep, how smoke gathers around the lungs and eyes, how children remain close to adults, how tools are protected, and how food can be prepared without every task being exposed to weather. During the colder phases of the Ice Age, protection from exposure could be a matter of survival. The human body, by itself, is not naturally built to lie safely through freezing nights without help. It needs covering, fire, shared warmth, and a place where wind is slowed. This is why shelter belongs to the deep story of human origins. Human beings did not become successful because the body alone defeated every climate. They became successful because the body learned to live with things made outside the body. A cave wall, a skin cloak, a hearth, a branch frame, a bed of plant material, a ring of stones, or a shared sleeping place could all reduce the direct force of the world on flesh. After the Ice Age began to end, many environments became less dominated by severe cold, but shelter did not become less important. Its purpose widened. In some regions, milder temperatures may have reduced the number of nights when cold alone was the central threat. Yet rain, dampness, insects, mud, smoke, animals, and fatigue still mattered. A warmer world can be easier in one way and harder in another. Wet cold can reach the body differently from dry cold. Forest shade can protect from wind but hold moisture. A lakeside or riverbank can give food and water while bringing insects and unstable ground. A coast can provide shellfish and fish, yet rising seas can shift the places where people once returned. Shelter became the place where these new pressures met the old body. It gave people a way to stay near resources longer. It allowed repeated work around a fire. It gave children a more predictable center in some seasonal landscapes. It allowed materials to remain in one place long enough to matter. A group that returns to the same sheltering place may begin to organize daily life around that return. The body then works differently. It may walk less far in some seasons, but bend more often. It may endure less open wind, but breathe more smoke. It may sleep with more protection, but in closer contact with others. It may spend more time repairing, sorting, drying, storing, scraping, cutting, and carrying within a smaller living space. These are not dramatic changes, yet they are the kinds of changes that shape human life. Archaeological traces show only fragments of this story. Hearths, post holes, stone arrangements, floor surfaces, concentrations of tools, food remains, and repeated occupation layers can suggest places where people built, returned, worked, and rested. Many shelters were probably made from materials that decay easily, so the absence of preserved walls does not mean the absence of human protection. Much of the sheltering world of ancient people has disappeared because wood rots, hides vanish, grasses decay, and earth erodes. This makes careful language necessary. We should not imagine every camp as a permanent home, and we should not pretend to know exactly how every group slept. But it is reasonable to say that shelter increasingly became part of the way humans controlled exposure after the coldest world loosened its grip. The body was no longer always forced to meet climate directly. Between skin and weather stood more layers of human making. That changed the pressure on the body. It softened some demands, especially cold and wind in certain settings. It also created new demands linked to repeated place, smoke, dampness, crowding, stored materials, and the daily labour of maintaining a living space. The end of the Ice Age, therefore, did not simply make the body comfortable. It moved the body into a more constructed world. The ancient body still carried hunger, cold sensitivity, fatigue, and the need for group safety. But now, in more places and more seasons, that body lived behind a human-made boundary. A shelter was not just a place to hide from the weather. It was one of the first signs that the human body was changing by changing the world immediately around it. The deeper change brought by shelter was not that humans stepped outside nature. It was that the human body learned to place a small human-made world between itself and the larger one. This had begun long before the Ice Age ended. Fire, clothing, tools, and temporary shelters were already part of the human way of surviving difficult environments. But after the coldest world began to retreat, those protective layers could be used in more varied ways. A shelter could still guard against cold wind. It could still hold warmth near sleeping bodies. It could still help children, older adults, and tired people remain close to the group. Yet, it could also become a place where food was dried, tools were repaired, fibers were worked, skins were scraped, water was carried back, and memory gathered around a repeated location. The body inside that space was not suddenly softer or weaker. It was being asked to live through a different arrangement of pressure. In the older cold world, exposure could be immediate and unforgiving. A poorly protected night could drain energy. Wet clothing, strong wind, or frozen ground could turn fatigue into danger. The body had to defend heat, and the group had to help it do so. After the Ice Age, in many regions, the most severe cold became less constant, but shelter remained important because vulnerability did not disappear. Sleep still left the body defenseless. Children still needed warmth and care. Food still needed preparation. Rain, damp ground, smoke, insects, animals, darkness, and social closeness all shaped the way a body rested and recovered. This is why shelter is not only an archaeological subject, it is a biological one. A wall, a roof, a cave, or even a simple windbreak changes the work of the skin, lungs, muscles, eyes, and nervous system. It changes how long the body stays tense. It changes whether sleep is broken by cold or by noise. It changes whether food is eaten quickly in the open or processed slowly near a hearth. It changes how often people carry materials to one place rather than moving every object onward across the land. From the deep origin of our species, the human body had always been unusual because it survived through shared knowledge as much as through anatomy. The body could not grow fur in one generation, but a group could learn to sew, wrap, build, and burn fuel. The body could not become immune to every storm, but it could return to a rock shelter, build a frame, or arrange sleeping places around fire. After the Ice Age, this old human strategy expanded into new landscapes. In some places, people may have lived longer near rivers, shores, lakes, wetlands, or wooded resources. Those places made shelter more than a night's protection. They made it a center of repeated activity. Repetition is important because the body is shaped not only by extremes, but by what happens again and again. A person who repeatedly sleeps under some protection from wind may spend less energy fighting cold at night. A person who repeatedly works near a hearth may breathe more smoke. A person who repeatedly bends, scrapes, cuts, carries, and stores materials may develop different strains than someone whose life is dominated by wide travel. Shelter softened some old demands while creating new ones. This is the careful answer to the change. Humans did not escape biology by building shelter. They changed the route through which biology met the world. Archaeological evidence can show hearths, floors, post traces, stone settings, tool concentrations, and layers of repeated use, but much of the sheltering world has vanished because its materials were fragile. We should imagine carefully, not with false certainty. Still, the wider pattern is clear enough to be meaningful. After the Ice Age, the human body increasingly lived inside spaces shaped by human choice. The body still carried an ancient sensitivity to cold, hunger, darkness, and exhaustion, but more often, in more places, those pressures were filtered through firelight, coverings, shared sleeping, stored materials, and repeated camps. The end of the Ice Age did not remove the wild world from human life. It changed the distance between the wild world and the skin. Sleep was never separate from the world around the body. It was not only the moment when people stopped moving, it was the moment when the body became open to cold, darkness, animals, weather, hunger, pain, and the sounds of other people nearby. During the colder phases of the Ice Age, sleep could not be understood as simple rest in a safe room. It belonged to fire, clothing, shared warmth, shelters, watchfulness, and the careful choice of where a group placed itself for the night. A tired body needed recovery, but a vulnerable body also needed protection. This tension reaches back into the oldest human story. From early human origins, the body was shaped not only for waking effort, but also for surviving the hours when effort had to stop. Upright walking, tools, cooperation, and fire helped humans move through difficult landscapes, but sleep asked a different question. Could the group keep bodies warm while they were still? Could children stay close enough to survive a cold night? Could adults rest without losing awareness of danger completely? Could fire be maintained long enough to soften darkness and cold? Rhine. These questions did not have one answer for all people or all places, and archaeology cannot show us every ancient night. But it is reasonable to say that sleep in many Ice Age environments was deeply tied to exposure. The body loses heat more easily when it is resting. Muscles are no longer producing as much warmth through movement. Hands cannot gather fuel while asleep. A sleeping person cannot easily adjust to danger, weather, or a fading fire. For this reason, the human body's need for sleep had to be held inside a social world. People likely slept near others not because ancient life was peaceful, but because the body was safer when warmth, warning, and care were shared. After the Ice Age began to end, the conditions around sleep slowly changed in many regions. This did not mean that nights became safe. Darkness remained powerful. Cold seasons remained. Animals, insects, rain, damp ground, smoke, hunger, and noise all continued to shape rest. Yet in some places, milder climates, more repeated camps, richer local resources, and more varied shelters may have changed the way bodies entered the night. A group that returned to a familiar place could know where the wind came from, where the ground stayed dry, where fuel could be found, and how close water or food might be. A shelter used again and again could soften one kind of exposure. A fire circle could become not only warmth, but also a center of social sleep. The body changed, because the night around it changed. It may have spent fewer nights fighting extreme cold in certain regions, while spending more nights inside closer contact with smoke, dampness, noise, insects, and other people. The pressure on sleep did not disappear, it moved. This matters because sleep is one of the most basic ways the body repairs itself. A body that sleeps under severe cold pays a cost. A body that sleeps with more protection may recover differently, but it may also face new disturbances. Closer camps can protect warmth, but they can bring more sound and movement. Returning to the same place can make rest more predictable, but it can also concentrate waste or attract animals. Fire can reduce fear of darkness and cold, but smoke can irritate the body. Shelter can block wind, but damp materials and crowded space can create other discomforts. The end of the Ice Age, therefore, did not create a simple movement from bad sleep to good sleep. It changed the ecology of rest. The ancient body still carried a nervous system alert to sound, darkness, temperature, and the presence of others. It still needed sleep, but it needed sleep inside a changing human environment. From the beginning, humans were creatures who survived by surrounding the body with shared knowledge. Sleep made that truth especially clear. No sleeping body can hunt, gather, build, or defend itself fully. It depends on place, group, fire, and timing. After the Ice Age, as some communities spent more time near familiar camps and resources, sleep could become tied more closely to repeated places rather than constant movement across open, cold ground. The body lying down at night still carried the memory of ancient danger, but the ground beneath it, the roof above it, the fire beside it, and the people around it were slowly becoming part of a different world. Sleep in a changing world is not only a question of night, it is a question of how the whole day prepares the body to lie down. After the Ice Age, in many regions, days could become organized around more repeated places, more varied food gathering, and more work near camp. That meant the body might arrive at sleep with a different kind of tiredness. In an older, cold, and open landscape, exhaustion could come from distance, exposure, searching, following animals, and carrying life across wide ground. In a warmer and more mixed world, exhaustion could also come from repeated labor near water, fire, shelter, stored materials, food preparation, and childcare. The body still needed sleep for repair, but the shape of fatigue around sleep was changing. A person might not always be worn down by the same long, cold movement. They might instead be tired from bending, grinding, scraping, carrying, tending fire, gathering small foods, or remaining alert inside a camp used again and again. This matters because sleep is deeply tied to what the body has spent during waking hours. The body that rests after walking across exposed land is not meeting the night in the same condition as the body that rests after a long day of processing plants, fish, hides, or wood. Both are ancient bodies. Both are tired. But they are tired in different ways. From the deeper beginning of human life, sleep had always been held inside a social arrangement. A human body sleeps poorly when it is completely alone in danger, because the sleeping body cannot fully protect itself. Our ancestors survived not by becoming animals that never needed rest, but by making rest possible through group life. Firelight, shared warmth, familiar voices, sleeping near others, and choosing safer ground all helped the body cross the vulnerable hours of darkness. After the Ice Age, as some communities returned more often to known camps, sleep may have become more connected to place. A familiar shelter or repeated hearth could give the body cues that the night belonged to a known world. At the same time, familiar places brought new disturbances. Smoke could drift through sleeping areas, other people could move, speak, cough, tend children, or wake at different times. Stored food and waste could attract animals or insects. Dampness near rivers, lakes, coasts, or wetlands could make the body cool even without severe freezing. So the change was not simply towards safer sleep. It was toward more layered sleep, shaped by protection and disturbance together. Modern people often imagine sleep as a private act inside a closed room, but ancient sleep was likely more connected to shared surroundings. We should be careful not to claim one exact pattern for all ancient people. Some may have slept in short stretches. Some may have slept more continuously when conditions allowed. Some may have woken because of cold, fire, children, sound, hunger, animals, or group activity. The evidence does not let us hear every night. But the biological truth is clear enough. Sleep depends on light, temperature, safety, food, social life, and fatigue. When the Ice Age ended, all of those influences began to change in many places. Longer warm seasons could change the comfort of rest. More wooded or sheltered environments could reduce wind but also reduce visibility. Repeated camps could make sleep more predictable but also more crowded. Fire could extend the social evening, soften fear, and warm bodies, while also bringing smoke and flickering light into the night. The human body carried into this world an old nervous system, sensitive to sound in the dark and comforted by the presence of others. That nervous system did not become modern when the ice retreated. It simply found itself sleeping in new arrangements. The deeper change was that rest became less controlled by the single pressure of cold exposure in some regions, and more shaped by a web of camp life, seasonal work, resource return, and human-made protection. The body changed because its nights changed. Its nights changed because the ground, the shelter, the fire, the group, and the day's labor changed around it. Sleep after the Ice Age did not become simple because the climate became warmer. It became more human-made, more social, and more tied to the places people returned to. The older cold world had made sleep depend strongly on exposure. The ground, the wind, the fire, the covering, the closeness of other bodies, and the ability of the group to protect its vulnerable hours. When the ice retreated, those pressures did not vanish. They became rearranged. In many regions, the body may have spent fewer nights under severe cold stress, yet it also began to sleep more often near repeated camps, stored materials, hearths, food remains, smoke, damp ground, insects, and the movements of other people. Rest was still rest, but the world surrounding rest was no longer the same. The body lying down at night carried a very old inheritance. Long before the last Ice Age ended, humans had been creatures who needed both movement and recovery. They could walk far, carry tools, learn landscapes, gather around fire, and cooperate through danger. But none of that removed the need to close the eyes and surrender some control to the dark. Sleep shows the limits of the human body more clearly than almost anything else. A person can be skilled, strong, watchful, and intelligent, but sleep makes every body dependent. It depends on ground, temperature, group safety, and what has happened during the day. After the Ice Age, daily life in some places began to draw people into new rhythms of return. A familiar camp could make sleep more predictable. A known shelter could reduce wind. A fire used again and again could become a center for evening activity. Children could sleep near adults in spaces that had been prepared with experience. Yet predictability is not the same as comfort. A repeated camp can also gather smoke, refuse, insects, noise, damp materials, and signs that attract animals. A sleeping body protected from one danger may be exposed to another. This is why the change in sleep should not be described as a movement from wild fear to peaceful rest. It was a shift from one kind of night to another. In cold open landscapes, a great question of sleep was how to survive exposure. In warmer and more varied landscapes, the question could become how to rest inside a denser human environment. That denser environment was still ancient, but it placed more layers between the body and the sky. Firelight changed darkness, shelter changed wind, group sleep changed warmth and safety, repeated places changed memory. These layers altered the body's experience of night. The nervous system still listened for sound. The skin still responded to cold or dampness. The lungs still met smoke when fire stayed close. The stomach still carried the memory of hunger if the day had not provided enough. The muscles still repaired from walking, carrying, scraping, gathering, digging, or bending. Sleep became a meeting point where all the new pressures of the post-Ice Age world came together. Archaeology cannot tell us exactly how long every person slept, how often they woke, or what they feared in the dark. It would be false to speak as if every ancient night could be reconstructed. But we can speak carefully about the conditions that shaped sleep. Hearths show the importance of fire. Repeated camps suggest return. Shelters and occupied places show that humans were making spaces where bodies could gather, work, and rest. Food remains show that camps were not only sleeping places, but centers of preparation and eating. These traces point toward a broader truth. After the Ice Age, the human body increasingly rested inside environments shaped by human behavior. The change was not purely biological, and it was not purely cultural. It was both at once. The body needed sleep because it was biological. It slept differently because culture changed the night around it. This is one of the quiet answers to why the human body changed when the Ice Age ended. The body did not have to become new in order to live differently. It only had to spend enough generations sleeping, eating, walking, working, and growing inside different conditions. The old body carried forward its ancient alertness, its need for warmth, its hunger for safety, and its dependence on others. But the night it entered had changed. It was less often only the open, cold night of a vast glacial world, and more often a night shaped by fire, shelter, repeated place, and the close breathing of human life around it. Hunger did not end when the Ice Age ended. This is one of the quiet mistakes people can make when they imagine the warmer world that followed the Great Cold. Warmer air did not automatically mean full stomachs. A longer growing season in some regions did not remove uncertainty. Forests, rivers, lakes, wetlands and coasts could offer more kinds of food, but more kinds of food did not always mean food at the right moment, in the right place, for every person. Hunger simply began to wear different faces. In the older Cold World, hunger could be tied to distance, failed hunts, missing herds, deep winter, frozen ground, or the energy cost of staying warm. After the ice retreated, hunger could still come from failed animal movement, but it could also come from empty shell beds, fish that did not arrive, seeds not yet ripe, nuts lost to weather, roots hidden under hard soil, dry seasons, floods, damp storage, or a familiar place that no longer gave what it had given before. The body was still ancient, and it still carried old responses to scarcity. It still treated dense food as valuable. It still protected energy when energy was uncertain. It still made hunger a powerful signal because, across deep human time, hunger had never been a small inconvenience. It had been a condition that could shape growth, strength, fertility, movement, sleep, and survival. From the deeper beginning of the human story, our ancestors survived because the body could live through uneven supply, and because groups could soften that unevenness through sharing, memory, tools, and fire. Food was never only individual. A child could not gather everything alone. An injured adult could still survive if others shared. Knowledge of seasons, animals, plants, water, and safe places could turn an uncertain landscape into a livable one. After the Ice Age, this old human system remained, but the pattern of uncertainty shifted. In many regions, people may have had access to broader diets, yet broader diets can demand broader knowledge. A person had to know not only where one large animal might be, but when fish moved, when plants ripened, when shellfish were safe or available, when birds nested, when roots could be dug, and when stored food might spoil. Hunger became less like one empty road and more like a web of small failures and small chances. This changed the body's daily life. A body that eats many seasonal foods may experience energy in pulses. Some days can be rich, other days can be thin. Some foods may fill the stomach but provide less fat. Some may require long preparation before they become useful. Some may be abundant for a short time and absent afterward. The body had to keep living through these uneven rhythms. Archaeological traces can show pieces of this shift, but they must be read carefully. Plant remains, animal bones, fish bones, shells, grinding stones, hearths, and storage features in later contexts can suggest how people handled changing food worlds. They cannot tell us that hunger disappeared. They cannot prove that every group suffered in the same way. They show that humans kept adjusting. The important point is that the end of the Ice Age did not remove the ancient problem of feeding a body. It changed the problem's shape. Cold hunger and distance hunger were joined by seasonal hunger, processing hunger, storage hunger, and the hunger of living near resources that were useful but not always reliable. The body changed because it had to meet these new forms of uncertainty without losing its old inheritance. It still wanted warmth, fat, rest, and shared safety. It still carried deep signals from a world where not eating enough could quickly become dangerous. But after the ice, the body met hunger inside a more varied earth, where survival depended not only on strength and endurance, but on timing, memory, patience, and the careful use of many imperfect foods. A new kind of hunger begins when people learn to depend more heavily on foods that return to the same place. This can sound like progress, and in many ways it was an important human advantage. A river that brings fish, a shore that offers shellfish, a grove that drops nuts, a patch of edible seeds, or a valley with roots and seasonal plants can make the world feel more predictable than a cold open plain where large animals may move beyond reach. But predictability is never the same as certainty. A food that returns can still fail, a plant can ripen late, a storm can damage a gathering place, water can rise too high or fall too low. A stored food can rot, attract animals, or be lost. After the Ice Age, in some regions, People could spend more time around resources that seemed reliable, and this changed the body's relationship with hunger. Hunger was no longer only the sudden emptiness that followed a failed hunt or a long winter journey. It could become the slower pressure of waiting for the right season, preparing foods that needed work, stretching supplies, and living close to a landscape that gave in cycles. From the deep beginning of human life, the body had been built around uneven food. Our ancestors did not survive because every day provided the same meal. They survived because the body could endure gaps, because groups could share, and because memory could turn scattered food into a pattern. The body learned the value of energy-dense food because fat, meat, cooked starch, and other rich resources could protect life when the next meal was uncertain. After the Ice Age, this old hunger system did not disappear. It entered a world where some foods could be gathered in larger amounts, processed, carried, and sometimes stored. Storage changed the meaning of hunger. It allowed a group to hold part of one season for another moment, but it also tied survival to planning, labor, and protection. A pile of seeds is not a meal until it is gathered, cleaned, dried, guarded, ground, cooked, or otherwise prepared. A supply of dried meat or fish is useful only if it lasts. Nuts, roots, and grains can matter greatly, but they ask the body for repeated work before they feed it. This is one way the body changed after the Ice Age. It began, in more places, to spend energy not only finding food, but managing food through time. Hands worked before hunger arrived, backs bent before the stomach was empty, shoulders carried tomorrow's meal today. The body was still ancient, still sensitive to scarcity, but scarcity was increasingly negotiated through storage, processing, and return. Archaeological traces suggest that in many post-glacial environments, humans used broader food resources and, later in some regions, began moving toward more intensive plant use before full farming appeared. This did not happen everywhere, and it did not happen all at once. It should not be imagined as a single ladder from hunting to agriculture. Many hunter-gatherer communities used rich and complex food systems without farming. The careful point is that the end of the Ice Age created conditions in which new food habits could grow. Warmer climates, changing plants, stable water sources, and repeated camps could make certain resources worth more attention. As those resources became important, the body's burdens shifted. Teeth could meet more gritty or processed foods. Jaws and hands could repeat small emotions. Children could grow on diets shaped by local seasons. Adults could spend more time near supplies that had to be protected, shared, and prepared. This kind of hunger is quieter than the image of an empty frozen plain, but it is just as important for human history. It is the hunger of dependence. The more a group relies on certain places and certain foods, the more vulnerable it becomes when those places or foods fail. The body after the Ice Age therefore lived between two truths. Food could become more varied and more manageable, yet the body remained bound to season, weather, labor, and memory. It still carried the old fear of emptiness, but now that emptiness could come not only from absence, but from delay, spoilage, poor timing, or too much dependence on one resource. The human body changed because hunger itself became more layered. The hunger that followed the Ice Age was not only the hunger of an empty stomach, it was also the hunger of a body learning new dependence. In the colder world, survival in many regions had been closely tied to distance, exposure, large animals, and the ability to endure long gaps between reliable food. After the climate warmed, many landscapes offered broader choices, but those choices often came with new limits. A river could feed people if fish arrived. A shore could feed people if tides, seasons, and shell beds were favorable. A woodland could feed people if nuts, roots, fruits, and small animals were available at the right time. A camp could hold stored food if people had gathered enough, prepared it well, protected it from dampness, and kept animals away. Hunger became more connected to timing, labor, and memory. The body still carried old signals from deep human history, when energy was never guaranteed and a missed food opportunity could matter. That old body now lived in a world where food might be nearer in some places, but not always easier. A small food often asks for much work. Seeds must be collected and processed. Roots must be dug. Fish must be caught. Shells must be opened. Meat must be cut, dried, cooked, or shared before it spoils. Stored foods must be guarded. These tasks moved hunger into the hands, back, shoulders, teeth, and daily schedule. The body was no longer shaped only by the search for food. It was shaped by the management of food. This was a major change, because management creates its own kind of pressure. A group that relies on stored or seasonal foods must think ahead. It must decide what to eat now and what to save. It must spend energy before hunger becomes urgent. It must trust that the place it returns to will still provide. From the deeper beginning of human life, our ancestors survived because they could turn memory into food. They remembered where animals moved, where water remained, where plants returned, where stone could be found, and where shelter was possible. After the Ice Age, that memory became increasingly tied to repeated places in many regions. The body grew inside maps of return. Children learn not only how to endure hunger, but how to read the slow calendar of a landscape. This does not mean life became settled everywhere, and it does not mean farming had already begun in all these worlds. Many communities remained mobile and successful without agriculture, but the direction of bodily pressure was changing in some places. Instead of hunger arriving mainly as a vast absence across cold land, it could arrive as failure inside a known system. The fish did not come, the plants were not ready, the food went bad, the weather damaged a resource, the stored supply was not enough. This kind of hunger is quieter, but it is powerful because it lives inside expectation. Archaeology gives only fragments of this long shift. Remains of plants, bones of fish and animals, shell deposits, grinding stones, hearths, tools, and repeated camps suggest that many human groups broadened the ways they fed themselves after the last glacial world changed. These traces do not allow a simple claim that people became healthier or less healthy everywhere. Some diets may have been rich and varied, some may have been narrow at times. Some groups may have enjoyed seasonal abundance and then faced scarcity. The careful truth is that the body entered a more complicated food world. It still needed fat, protein, carbohydrates, minerals, water, warmth, and rest. It still responded strongly to dense food, because dense food had long helped humans survive uncertainty. But now, the uncertainty itself had more forms. It could come from weather, storage, processing, crowding near resources, or dependence on foods that were valuable but unreliable. The end of the Ice Age therefore changed the body by changing hunger's shape. It did not remove scarcity, it made scarcity more layered. A human body that had once endured cold, distance, and the missing herd now also endured waiting, preparing, guarding, storing, and returning. The ancient body remained, but it had to learn a new rhythm of need, where survival depended not only on finding food, but on carrying tomorrow's hunger inside today's work. Population is one of the least visible ways the human body changed after the Ice Age, because it does not begin with a single body. It begins with many bodies surviving close enough in time for a new pattern to appear. A warmer world did not make human life safe, and it did not fill every camp with food. But in some regions, richer local resources, repeated seasonal places, and more reliable access to water, fish, plants, animals, or stored foods may have allowed groups to remain longer in certain landscapes and support more children through the vulnerable years. This was not the same everywhere. Some groups stayed highly mobile. Some lived through scarcity. Some regions remained harsh. But where conditions allowed people to return often to dependable places, the future of the body began to change through generations. The human body is not shaped only by what adults endure. It is shaped by how children grow, how mothers recover, how much food reaches the young, how many people share care, and how often a community can survive the thin seasons. From the deep beginning of human life, childhood had been unusually long compared with many animals. A human child needed years of feeding, carrying, teaching, watching, and protection. This long childhood made humans vulnerable, but it also made culture powerful. Knowledge could be placed slowly into the next generation. Where to find water, how to use fire, how to read tracks, how to process plants, how to avoid danger, how to sleep near others, how to share, how to wait. After the Ice Age, As some environments became more stable or more productive at certain times of year, the social world around children could become denser in some places. More repeated camps could mean more familiar hands, more stored knowledge, more shared labor, and more chances for children to learn from older people. This changed the body, because the body grows inside care. A child who survives early hunger, cold, infection, injury, and abandonment becomes part of the next population. Over time, small differences in survival can matter. A landscape that supports slightly more children, or allows shorter gaps between births in some communities, can slowly alter the structure of human life. This does not mean people planned population growth, and it would be wrong to imagine ancient families thinking in modern demographic terms. The change happened through ordinary survival: a child kept warm, a mother fed enough to continue, a group able to share, a camp near enough resources, a season passed without disaster. As more bodies lived closer together in favorable places, new pressures also arrived. More people can mean more help, more knowledge, more protection, and more shared work. But more people can also mean more competition, more waste, more noise, more conflict, more pressure on nearby food, and more chances for illness to move from one body to another. The body after the Ice Age therefore entered a future where survival was increasingly shaped by the number of people around it. A small, scattered group faces one kind of danger. A larger, repeated community faces another. The body may be better protected from loneliness, cold, and hunger through sharing, while also more exposed to smoke, close contact, contaminated spaces, and the stress of living among many bodies. Archaeological traces can suggest these shifts through repeated settlements, larger accumulations of food remains, more intensive use of local resources, burials, hearths, tools, and signs that people return to the same places again and again. These remains do not allow us to claim that all post-Ice Age humans became settled or crowded. They show a broader possibility. In some regions, human life began to gather more tightly around places that could support repeated return. The body changed because population changed the environment without needing to change the climate. More people altered the sound of night, the sharing of food, the spread of care, the burden of disease, the labor around. The end of the Ice Age did not only change land and animals, it changed the number of human lives that could be held together in certain places. And once more bodies lived within the same circle of fire, food, shelter, and memory, the human body began to face a future shaped not only by nature, but by other humans. As people lived closer together in some favorable landscapes, the human body began to face a new kind of environment, other human bodies. This may sound ordinary, because humans had always been social. From the deeper beginning of our species, no human body survived by strength alone. Infants needed long care. Adults needed shared knowledge. Fire, tools, shelter, food, warning, and memory all worked better when carried by a group. But the size, density, and rhythm of that group could change the pressures on the body. A small mobile band moving through a wide landscape creates one kind of social world. A community returning often to the same camp, the same water, the same food source, or the same sheltering area creates another. After the Ice Age, in some regions, richer local resources and more repeated places may have allowed more people to spend more time near one another. This did not happen everywhere, and it should not be imagined as a sudden beginning of crowded village life in all lands. But where people gathered more often, the body entered a denser human atmosphere. Closeness could protect life. More hands could gather fuel, carry food, watch children, repair tools, share warmth, and care for the sick or injured. A child could learn from many adults, not only from parents. Older people could hold knowledge about seasons, plants, animals, safe places, and past shortages. In that sense, more people around the body could make survival more secure. Yet the same closeness could also bring new burdens. Smoke from repeated fires might linger near sleeping and working spaces. Waste could collect around places used again and again. Stored food could attract animals. Noise could interrupt rest. Conflict could become more likely where needs overlapped. Illness could move more easily when bodies remained near one another for longer periods. The human body after the Ice Age was therefore not simply protected by society. It was also exposed through society. This is one of the quiet turning points in the story. The environment was no longer only cold wind, open ground, animals, rivers, forests, and hunger. The environment increasingly included the breath, touch, labor, waste, care, noise, and sickness of other people. From human origins onward, long childhood had made care central to survival. A human child grows slowly, learns slowly, and depends for years on food, warmth, teaching, and protection. When communities became more stable in some places, care could become more distributed. Children might remain near familiar hearths, repeated shelters, and people who returned season after season. That could help more young bodies survive difficult years. But more surviving children also meant more mouths to feed, more waste near camp, more sleeping bodies, more need for shared rules, and more pressure on local resources. The body changed because population changed the terms of daily life. Hunger was no longer only a private signal in one stomach, it became a pressure across many stomachs. Fatigue was no longer only the result of one person's movement, it became tied to group labor, carrying water, preparing food, tending children, maintaining shelter, and managing materials for many people. Rest was no longer only a matter of finding a quiet place. It had to fit inside the sound and movement of a shared camp. Archaeological traces can suggest some of these changes through repeated occupation layers, hearths, food remains, burials, tools, and signs of intensified resource use. These traces do not allow us to describe every social arrangement or every family. They only show that in some places, human presence became more repeated, more concentrated, and more tied to particular landscapes. The biological meaning is careful but important. A body growing inside a denser human world meets different risks and supports than a body growing in a smaller, more scattered group. It may be better protected from cold, loneliness, and sudden hunger through sharing. It may also face more exposure to infection, smoke, contaminated spaces, and repeated labor. The end of the Ice Age did not only change weather and food, it changed how many human lives could be held near one another, and that closeness slowly became one of the forces shaping the body itself. The future of the human body, after the Ice Age, was not shaped only by warmer air, new foods, or different shelters. It was shaped by the slow gathering of people around places that could hold them. A landscape that can support more children does not merely feed more mouths, it changes the human world that every growing body enters. In a small mobile group, the body learns one rhythm of life: movement, close cooperation, shared risk, and the need to keep possessions light enough to carry. In a larger or more repeated community, the body learns another rhythm: more faces, more voices, more shared labor, more competition, more contact, and more memory stored in place. After the Ice Age, in some regions, rivers, coasts, wetlands, woodlands, and seasonal resources allowed people to return again and again to favorable locations. Over time, repeated return could make human presence thicker on the land. This did not mean that all people became settled, and it did not mean that mobility lost its importance. Many human groups remained mobile for a very long time, and some still used movement as a highly successful way of life. But where people gathered more often, population itself became part of the environment. The body was now shaped not only by cold, hunger, distance, and animals, but by the density of human life around it. This change reaches back to one of the deepest facts about human origins. Our bodies are built through dependence. A human infant cannot survive alone. A child needs food, warmth, teaching, protection, and years of social learning. The long human childhood is one of the reasons culture became so powerful. It allowed knowledge to accumulate across generations, but it also made every new body vulnerable for a long time. After the Ice Age, if some places allowed more children to survive, then the future of the human body began to change through childhood itself. More surviving children meant more learners, more helpers in time, more mouths in the present, and more pressure on the group. A denser community could protect a child from cold and hunger through shared care, but it could also expose that child to more infection, more smoke, more waste, more noise, and more competition for food. The body was held by society, and society also pressed upon the body. This is why population change should not be seen only as a number. It was a change in the texture of daily life. More people can carry more knowledge. They can remember more places, divide tasks more widely, protect one another more effectively, and care for those who cannot provide for themselves. But more people also make every resource more contested. A shell bed, a stand of nuts, a water source, a fishing place, or a camp with good shelter can become valuable because many bodies depend on it. The human body then grows in a world where survival requires not only endurance, but negotiation, sharing, timing, patience, and social attention. Archaeological traces suggest parts of this larger turn. Repeated living places, thicker layers of use, food remains gathered in greater quantity, burials, hearths, tools, and signs that certain landscapes became important across time. These traces do not reveal every relationship or every rule inside ancient communities. They do not allow certainty about how people felt about one another. But they do show that the post-Ice Age world opened the possibility for more repeated, more concentrated human life in some regions. That concentration changed the body's future. It helped create the conditions that later made farming, villages, and larger societies possible in some parts of the world, though those changes came unevenly and not everywhere. The first shift was quieter. More bodies lived closer to one another, and the body began to meet humanity itself as a stronger force of nature. The ancient body still carried the Ice Age inheritance of hunger, cold sensitivity, movement, and alertness. But now it increasingly grew inside human-made patterns, shared camps, repeated places, stored materials, social learning, and the care of children by more than one pair of hands. The end of the Ice Age did not simply change the climate around the body. It changed the number of bodies around the body, and that may be one of the most important changes of all. Farming is often imagined as the moment when hunger finally became controlled, but the history of the human body is quieter and more complicated than that. After the Ice Age, farming appeared in some regions at different times, from local relationships between people, plants, animals, climate, water, and repeated places. It was not a single invention that spread instantly across the whole earth, and it was not a simple rescue from an earlier life of constant starvation. Long before farming, humans had already survived through hunting, gathering, fishing, shellfish collecting, plant processing, fire, tools, movement, memory, and sharing. The end of the Ice Age helped create conditions in which some groups could pay closer attention to certain plants and animals, return to the same places more often, and eventually rely more heavily on controlled or managed food sources. But when the body began to live through farming, it did not only gain a new supply of calories, it entered a new bargain. A field can feed many people, but it also asks for repeated labor. Seeds must be saved, planted, guarded, harvested, carried, processed, and stored. Soil must be worked. Water must be watched. Crops can fail. Stored food can spoil or be taken by animals, insects, dampness, or other people. The body that once followed a broad landscape of many wild foods could, in some communities, become more tied to a narrower set of foods and a smaller territory. This did not happen everywhere, and it did not make every farmer unhealthy or every forager healthy. The truthful point is not a simple comparison. The point is that farming changed the pressures placed on the body. From the deep beginning of human life, the body had been shaped by variety, movement, and uncertainty. It had learned to survive uneven food through flexibility. Farming offered another kind of security, but security came with concentration. More people could live near stored food, but more people also meant more mouths, more waste, more close contact, more repeated work, and more pressure on the land. A dependable crop could reduce some forms of hunger, while increasing dependence on that crop. A community could survive a difficult season because food had been stored, but if that stored food failed, the danger could become larger because many bodies depended on the same source. This is why farming belongs to the story of why the human body changed after the Ice Age. It was not simply a new way to eat. It was a new way to grow, labor, sleep, share, become ill, recover, and raise children. Archaeological evidence from many regions suggests that early farming societies often show signs of changed diets, repeated physical work, closer settlement, and new disease pressures, though the exact pattern differs greatly from place to place. Bones and teeth can sometimes show stress, wear, growth disruption, or changes linked to diet and labor. Settlements can show more permanent living spaces, storage, waste, and human concentration. These traces should be read carefully. They do not prove one universal story for all farming peoples. They show that the body was entering a more managed world. The hand that once gathered many seasonal foods might now spend more time grinding grain or processing stored plants. The back that once carried a mobile life across many places might now bend repeatedly over soil, harvest, water, tools, and storage. The stomach might receive more regular food in some seasons, yet less diversity in others. The child might grow near more people and more food stores, but also near more infection, smoke, animals, waste, and crowding. Farming did not end the ancient struggle between body and environment. It moved that struggle closer to home. After the Ice Age, humans increasingly changed the land in order to feed the body, and then the changed land began reshaping the body in return. The cost of farming was not only paid in the field, it was paid inside the body, slowly, through repetition. A farming life can appear more secure because it creates a visible food supply. Crops can be planted, watched, harvested, stored, and counted in ways that many wild foods cannot. A storage place can make tomorrow feel less uncertain than a landscape that must be searched again each day. But a stored crop also changes the body's dependence. Instead of living from many scattered foods across a wider territory, some communities began to rely more heavily on a smaller number of plants or animals. That change could support more people, but it could also narrow the diet in some places. A meal can become more regular while becoming less varied. A community can have more total food while still facing shortages of certain nutrients. A child can grow near storage and still face hunger if harvests fail. Food is poorly preserved or too many people depend on the same supply. This is why the rise of farming after the Ice Age should be told carefully. It was not simply a mistake, and it was not simply a miracle. It was a new human strategy, and every strategy places the body under certain pressures. From the deeper beginning of human life, the body had been formed in a world of movement and variety. Our ancestors survived by using many foods when they were available, carrying knowledge across landscapes, and adjusting to season, animal movement, water, plants, and weather. Farming changed that relationship. It made humans more powerful in one sense, because people could shape the land to produce food. But it also made many bodies more tied to one place, one harvest, one storage system, and one repeated cycle of labor. Soil had to be worked. Plants had to be protected. Food had to be processed. Grain or other stored crops often had to be ground, cooked, guarded, and distributed. The body did not escape hard work. It met hard work in a more repeated form. Shoulders, backs, knees, hands, necks, and teeth could all enter new patterns of strain. The work of survival became less about moving lightly through many places and more about returning again and again to the same tasks. Archaeological studies in different regions have often found that early farming communities could show signs of changed physical stress, dental wear, dietary shifts, and new disease pressures, although the details vary widely and should not be forced into one rule. Some communities may have had strong, stable food systems. Others may have lived with intense labor and narrow diets. The important point is that farming changed the environment immediately around the body. More people could live together because food could be produced and stored. But more people living together created closer contact. More waste, more smoke, more exposure to animals in some regions, and more opportunities for infections to move through a community. A body that had once faced the open risks of cold, distance, and uncertain wild foods could now face the enclosed risks of settlement, storage, crowding, and repeated labor. This did not happen everywhere at once, and many people continued to live by hunting, gathering, fishing, herding, or mixed ways of life. Human history after the Ice Age was not one straight road. Still, where farming took hold, it changed the body by changing the daily contract between effort and food. The body works now for a future harvest. It bent today for food that would be eaten later. It guarded stored energy against weather, animals, spoilage, and other people. It raised children in places where food could be nearer, but also where illness and social pressure could be nearer too. The ancient body still carried its older inheritance: hunger signals shaped by scarcity, a desire for dense energy, a need for movement, a need for rest, and a dependence on group care. But farming placed those ancient needs inside a more managed world. The land was being changed to feed humans, and the changed land began changing humans in return. The end of the Ice Age did not make farming inevitable everywhere, but it opened landscapes in which some people could experiment with deeper dependence on certain plants, places, and cycles. In that dependence, the human body entered one of the most important bargains in its history: more control over food and more control from food. Farming changed the human body because it changed the meaning of work, food, place, and time all at once. Before farming became important in some regions, many human groups survived through flexible movement and broad knowledge of wild foods. They followed seasons, animals, rivers, coasts, plants, weather, and memory. The body met uncertainty by staying adaptable. After the Ice Age, as climates shifted and some landscapes became more favorable for repeated return, certain plants and animals gradually became more central to human life in some places. Farming did not appear as one sudden doorway into safety. It emerged unevenly, through long relationships between people and local environments. Once it took hold, however, it placed the body inside a new rhythm. Food was no longer only something found, hunted, gathered, caught, or processed from the wild world. Food increasingly became something expected from a place that humans had worked before. That expectation changed everything. The body bent over soil, hands saved seeds, planted, harvested, carried, stored, ground, cooked, and guarded food. Feet returned to the same fields, the same water sources, the same storage places, and the same settlements. Backs and shoulders carried not only today's hunger, but tomorrow's supply. The ancient body, formed through deep time in a world of movement, variety, and uncertain abundance, now faced the repeated labor of dependence. Farming could support more people, and that was one of its great powers. But supporting more people also meant that more bodies depended on the same harvest, the same land, and the same stored foods. A bad season, a crop failure, a flood, a drought, pests, conflict, or spoilage could threaten many people at once. In this way, farming reduced some dangers while concentrating others. It could make food more predictable, but also make failure more serious. It could allow communities to grow, but larger communities brought closer contact. More waste, more smoke, more disease pressure, more social tension, and more labor needed to maintain the system that fed them. The body after the Ice Age was therefore not simply rescued by agriculture. It was drawn into a different bargain with the earth. Archaeological evidence from early farming regions often suggests changes in diet, workload, settlement density, health stress, and disease environments, though these patterns vary and should not be treated as identical everywhere. Some farming communities likely found stability and resilience. Others may have faced narrower diets or heavier labor. The honest story is not that farming made humans better or worse in one simple stroke. It made human life more managed, and management has costs. A managed field can give food, but it must be defended from weeds, weather, animals, and other people. A stored harvest can carry a community through scarcity, but it must be protected from dampness, rot, insects, theft, and time. A permanent or repeated settlement can hold memory, shelter, and social care, but it also holds refuse, crowding, smoke, and closer exposure to infection. The human body changed inside these repeated conditions. Teeth met more processed and sometimes more gritty foods. Bones and joints met repetitive strain. Children grew in denser communities. Adults worked under the pressure of future food, not just immediate hunger. The ancient signals of the body remained. The pull toward energy-rich food, the need for rest, the response to scarcity, the dependence on shared care, the vulnerability to cold, illness, and exhaustion. But those signals now operated inside a world that humans had partly built around themselves. This is one of the deepest consequences of the Ice Age ending. As the environment warmed and changed, humans did not merely adapt to nature. They increasingly altered nature to create food, and then those altered landscapes reshaped the body that had created them. Farming was not the end of survival pressure. It was survival pressure brought closer, made more regular, more social, more stored, and more dependent on the success of human control. The body changed because the old wild uncertainty did not disappear. It became planted in the ground, gathered into storage, and carried forward through every generation that lived from the harvest. The modern human body is not a new object placed outside history. It is an old body living inside new arrangements. It still carries deep signals from worlds where cold mattered, hunger mattered, distance mattered, sleep was never fully private, and survival depended on other people. The end of the Ice Age did not erase those signals. It changed the conditions around them. That is why some of the body's ordinary discomforts can be understood more clearly when placed inside deep time. A body that seeks warmth is not strange. It comes from a long history in which warmth could protect life. A body that values dense food is not simply weak-willed. It carries a biological memory of uncertain energy. A body that becomes restless without movement is not only reacting to a modern schedule, it belongs to a species shaped by walking, carrying, gathering, searching, and returning. A body that sleeps better with safety, rhythm, darkness, and quiet is still carrying the ancient truth that sleep is vulnerable. These connections should not be turned into medical advice or simple claims about one perfect natural life. The past was not a paradise. Ice Age life was difficult, and life after the Ice Age remained difficult in new ways. But the past does help explain why the body can feel mismatched with the world it now occupies. After the Ice Age, humans began living in environments increasingly shaped by human decisions. Shelters, camps, stored foods, repeated places, larger communities, farming, and eventually towns, cities, roads, rooms, clocks, and artificial light. Each layer made survival possible in new ways, yet each layer also changed the pressures on the body. The ancient body did not stop needing movement, variety, warmth, rest, social safety, and meaningful effort. It simply found itself inside systems that could provide some needs while quietly disturbing others. This is the careful meaning of bodily change after the Ice Age. It was not one sudden transformation. It was the beginning of a long mismatch between inherited biology and changing human worlds. From the deeper beginning of our species, the body survived by adapting to uncertainty through flexibility. It could walk far, learn from others, share food, use tools, control fire, and protect children across years of dependence. These traits did not vanish when the ice retreated. They became the foundation for new forms of life. Humans used flexibility to make warmer, safer, more productive surroundings, and those surroundings slowly changed what the body had to do each day. The body once shaped by open distance could spend more time in repeated labor. The body once exposed to cold could live behind shelter, cloth, fire, and eventually walls. The body once fed by many wild resources could become tied, in some places, to stored grains or managed animals. The body once sleeping under shifting natural conditions could sleep near hearths, in camps, in settlements, and much later in rooms separated from the night outside. None of these changes was simply good or bad. Each was a bargain. Protection reduced exposure, but brought smoke, crowding, and dependence. Storage reduced immediate hunger, but created new vulnerability to failure. Larger communities increased care and knowledge, but also increased disease pressure and social strain. Farming supported more people, but often required heavier repeated labor and closer reliance on fewer foods. The modern body stands at the far end of these bargains. It is not separate from the Ice Age, and it is not simply trapped by it. It is the result of many layers of change, each one adding a new relationship between flesh and world. When we ask why the human body changed when the Ice Age ended, we are really asking why the body still feels old even in a new world. The answer begins with climate, but it does not end there. The ice retreated, landscapes shifted, foods changed, movement changed, shelters changed, sleep changed, hunger changed, populations changed, and farming changed the daily contract between people and the earth. The body carried all of this forward, not as a perfect memory, but as a living inheritance. To understand the modern body, we have to resist the temptation to look for one clean beginning. There was no single moment when the Ice Age ended and the human body became what it is now. There was a long crossing. Bodies that had inherited deep responses to cold, hunger, movement, darkness, pain, and dependence on the group entered landscapes that were becoming warmer, richer in some places, wetter in others, more wooded, more coastal, more settled. and eventually more managed by human hands. The modern body still carries that crossing. It carries it not as a perfect record, but as tendencies that can feel familiar in ordinary life. The desire for warmth makes sense in a body descended from generations for whom cold was not a minor discomfort. The attraction to dense food makes sense in a body shaped by long uncertainty around energy. The need to move makes sense in a body whose bones, muscles, lungs, and balance were formed through walking, carrying, bending, climbing, gathering, and returning. The unease many people feel in darkness or isolation makes sense in a species whose sleep and safety were once held inside the presence of others. None of this means that every modern problem has a simple prehistoric cause. The body is not a fossil with skin. It is alive, flexible, and shaped by many histories at once. But the end of the Ice Age helps us see why the body can feel pulled in different directions. It is old enough to carry signals from harsh environments, but recent human life has placed those signals inside settings that are very different from the ones that first gave them meaning. A body built for changing seasons may now live under artificial schedules. A body shaped by movement may sit for long periods. A body shaped by hunger and abundance may live near constant food. A body shaped by darkness, firelight, and group sleep may sleep near screens, machines, traffic, or silence that feels unnatural. These are not moral failures. They are mismatches between ancient biological expectations and newer surroundings. From the deeper origin of human life, our strength was never only in the body itself. It was in the body's ability to live through tools, learning, and cooperation. After the Ice Age, that strength became even more powerful. Humans did not simply adapt to the changing world, they changed the world around the body. They made shelters, stored food, returned to rich places, built settlements, planted crops, managed animals, organized labor, and created social worlds far denser than many earlier landscapes. Each step protected the body from something and exposed it to something else. Shelter protected against wind and cold, but brought smoke, dampness, and closer contact. Storage protected against immediate hunger, but created dependence and risk of failure. Farming produced food, but demanded repeated work and often narrowed daily eating in some communities. Larger groups increased care and memory, but also increased illness pressure, waste, conflict, and noise. The modern body stands within all these layers. It is not simply an Ice Age body trapped in the present, and it is not a completely new body freed from the past. It is a layered body, carrying older needs into newer worlds. That is why honest history is useful here. It does not tell us to return to an imagined perfect past. There was no perfect past. Ancient people faced injury, hunger, cold, loss, danger, and uncertainty. But history can soften the way we judge the body. It can show that many signals we experience are not random. They are echoes of older pressures, reshaped by newer lives. The body asks for warmth, because warmth once mattered deeply. It asks for rest, because survival always required repair. It asks for movement, because motion is part of human design. It asks for connection, because a human body was never meant to grow, sleep, learn, or survive entirely alone. The end of the Ice Age changed the human body because it changed the world that kept asking the body what it had to be. The final meaning of this story is not that the Ice Age made us one thing and the warmer world made us another. The human body is not so simple. It is a living record of many pressures layered together. Cold and warmth, hunger and abundance, movement and shelter, isolation and group life, wild foods and stored foods, uncertainty and control. When the Ice Age ended, the planet changed first. Ice withdrew from many places, seas rose, forests moved, rivers and wetlands expanded or shifted, animals changed their ranges. Some familiar resources declined, and others became more important. Human bodies did not transform in one clean moment. They entered new conditions, generation after generation, and those conditions slowly changed the way bodies grew, worked, rested, ate, reproduced, and depended on one another. This is the safest and most truthful way to understand the title's question. The body changed because daily life changed. It changed because the old cold world no longer trained every community in the same way. It changed because food came through different paths. Shelter filtered the weather, sleep moved into more human-made spaces, hunger became more layered, populations gathered more closely in some places, and farming later created a deeper dependence between people and land. None of this should be used to imagine a perfect ancient body. Ancient life was not pure, easy, or healthier in every way. It carried pain, injury, loss, hunger, cold, infection, fear, and uncertainty. But neither should we imagine the modern body as separate from that past. The body we live in still asks for things that make sense in deep history. It asks for movement because human life was never meant to be still for too long. It asks for rest because every body must repair itself after effort. It asks for warmth because cold was once a direct pressure on survival. It asks for food that gives energy because scarcity shaped appetite over countless generations. It asks for human presence because a human body, especially a young body, was never designed to survive entirely alone. These are not instructions for how to live. They are reminders that the body has a history, and history can make the body feel less like a failure and more like an inheritance. From the deeper beginning of our species, humans survived by doing something unusual. They did not wait for biology to solve every problem. They made tools, they kept fire, they carried children, they shared knowledge, they remembered places, they wrapped the body in culture. After the Ice Age, that power grew stronger. Humans increasingly changed the environment immediately around them, and then those changed environments shaped the body in return. That is the great lesson. We are not only adapted to nature, we are also adapted to the worlds we create around ourselves. A shelter protects, but also changes sleep. Stored food protects, but also changes hunger. Farming feeds, but also changes labor. Larger communities protect, but also change disease, stress, care, and childhood. Every human solution becomes part of the next human environment. This is why the end of the Ice Age still matters. It marks one of the great turning points when the body began living less directly under one harsh natural rhythm and more deeply inside a world modified by human hands. The ice retreated, but the old body remained. The world softened in some places, but survival did not become simple. The body carried forward its ancient needs into new shelters, new foods, new communities, and new burdens. And even now, far from the cold plains and shifting post-glacial rivers, the same quiet question remains. If the human body is a memory of vanished worlds, what kind of world are we writing into it now?